Dune Awakening just had its official livestream. I'll go over the entire recap with that, cover all the important details. We'll also go over some additional dev comments that were made after the livestream, which do cover some additional information. We'll have some last minute mentionables, as well as a whole bunch more. What's up world, it's Utopia back in with another video today. We're checking out all things Dune Awakening. Let's just jump right into it. Of course, first up here we did have that brand new developer livestream, where I will recap the entirety of it. So first up here, they did cover the combat overview. A lot of their footage was based around combat, where they did mention that everything is going to be based around core abilities, and that there will be a significant toll on the amount of enemies. So for one enemy, it is manageable. However, if you're facing two, it will then get a bit rough. And if you're facing three enemies at the same time, that's when it does become challenging. So it does look like they want to have things a little bit more condensed as far as the enemy count total, or at least once you take on more than 3 enemies, it is going to be quite challenging. They made a big point that they want to have everything based on second-to-second combat, which, speaking of combat, they actually did go on to range combat first. There's going to be an abundance of range weapons that are supported by the Dune lore, so we could see even more in the future. The basic mechanics are that they are spring-loaded weapons, so they won't use ammo types or traditional ammo. They're going to go ahead and use darts instead, where certain darts will then penetrate armor unless you dash appropriately. Again, this will apply to enemies as well. They also did go over the melee combat, and they went over a few weapon types here. Now, Dune has a plethora of melee weapons inside of its lore, but they did cover these 4 here, where they do mention that swords will have an area effect, and seem like the only ones with major area effect. It will be smaller though overall, at least in its scope, but it will be also a slower speed to actually swing them. There's also going to be rapiers, and something called the kinjals, which are very fast, but they're focused in a limited range and can only attack 1 enemy at once. And then last up there is Chris knives. Again, these were just the 4 main ones they did cover. They jumped over next here to shield mechanics, where there will be an interaction with combat. Shields actually do drop when you shoot, affecting both you and enemies. There was an additional dev note here, where melee attacks do not cause your shield to drop, and the shield will remain vulnerable to heavy or slow blade attacks. So there is a specific mechanic there where you can slow attack and penetrate an enemy shield. That can also happen to you. Now, they covered one last detail here with the combat mechanics. That is staggering, which is present but implemented as a minor component at the moment. But both you and an enemy can be staggered, and this can change the course of combat actually quite significantly. There was actually a decent amount of staggering showcased during this stream. Which leads me on to the next point here about ability progression. So they did talk about abilities, that how you'll be able to utilize them. They showcased off a few of them during the live stream. However, you're only going to start with 2 abilities, where you will gain a 3rd ability later in the story. So it does seem like you'll get 2 abilities quite early on, with that 3rd coming quite later. Now, here is a major topic. Since this is being considered a survival MMO light, they actually do have worlds and servers. The breakdown of this is that worlds will have layers. So essentially, a world is a central server hub based on your region. Now, first up, they did actually showcase a server map location. So these are essentially where you'll have a world server. North America will have the most locations, with Central US, West Coast, and East Coast. I've actually never seen a central server hub in an MMO before. That's pretty cool there. I'll see how that one goes. Of course, we do have other regions like Europe, Asia, Australia, and South America. However, if we jump back to it, so that essentially is what worlds are. Now, worlds will also have layers, or essentially sub-servers or different sitches. So different worlds will have different layers. Each layer in the Haga Basin will contain 40 players per layer, similar to WoW. But those also do have sub-servers called sieges, which again house more players, I believe, per. And you'll be able to visit any player on any of those different sieges and layers. However, again, that's region-based. So if you pick Central US server, for example, from what I can tell, you will not be able to play with somebody that is on the East Coast server. But you can play with anybody on any of the Central US sub-server, which also does include those layers within those. There's also going to be a deep desert area designated to PvP. That layer specifically will have hundreds of players. And there is 2 different social hubs, kind of like Destiny. Again, they really didn't talk about how many players are per those. Does seem like it will be a decent amount though. Now, there is one restriction to being on the same world server it is that you cannot claim land. You can build with another player, or if another player is on that different siege. So essentially if you're on world server 1 and a player is on world server 2, or if they're on a different siege and you join a different siege in the same world server. So again, if we're all on Central US, I can join any player on Central US server, but I will not be able to claim land on that other layer. What I can do is build in my friend's territory. So that is the only restriction there with that. Speaking of other players and multiplayer here, groups can contain up to 4 players per group, with guilds going all the way up to 32. And guilds can also operate across different sieges. Again, they have to be in the same world server, which is region-based, or in the US case, basically West Coast, East Coast, and Central. So you will need to be contained into those subcategories. That is considered your world server. But then any of those layers and any of those sieges can then participate together. Now, there is actually a faction system within Dune. Guilds themselves can pledge to different factions, and you must be in that same faction in order to join that guild, or when that guild does decide, you will be selected into that faction. If you don't have that same faction, or if you change factions, which you can do once, that's actually going to boot you from the guild. Last up here for communication, there will actually be party chat and even proximity chat. Really cool there. I am super happy about that. So glad more MMOs and MMO lights and survival games are actually implementing that. We actually do have some additional info here. So last up, they did talk about that there is going to be a large-scale beta that is scheduled in May. As we saw, if you didn't see already, Dune did get delayed from May to June, but there will be a beta in its place. I was actually invited to a closed alpha. Now, I am able to tell you guys that I am participating in this creator and press kit alpha. However, I cannot tell you anything else about the game inside that alpha that isn't public information, just that I am playing it and that I will have footage and more content to come soon. So do watch out for that. I have a ton planned for it. Now, there was another question here about PvP options. PvP is entirely optional. There is a PvP exclusive area where there will be presented risks, meaning that everybody can be engaged in PvP. You're not forced to PvP, but if you are attacked, or you at least can be attacked by another player, so you do have to be careful in those zones, but you can loot and leave. They also do mention that players of the same faction can be attacked if they choose to engage. So faction choice does not matter there, you can attack fellow factionites. That does cover it for the dev livestream recap. However, there was a ton of additional information here, and this actually comes from the developer account over on the Reddit. There was some additional developer notes here. Now, speaking of the delay, someone asked here they hoped that there wouldn't be another delay after May, where Funcom Storm actually responded here, saying that they're confident about the state of the game, and they're basing this confidence on the closed beta that they have been running for the past year. These few weeks will allow them to make more improvements based on feedback they've been receiving. They essentially do feel that this is the sweet spot and getting the game ready. And they also do mention they have a ton of content planned for this game, so it does seem like it's going to come out in June no matter what. Now, there was some questions on if this is an MMO, if it's an MMO light, or a survival game. They did answer that question here again from Funcom Storm. They said indeed it's kind of its own thing. It has more story and social structure than many survival games, but it isn't necessarily an MMO in the traditional sense, and they have somewhat of a unique map structure that they touched in today's stream. Again, I did go over all those areas, so that's basically why. There was one more notable mention on this delay thread. Again, coming from Funcom Storm, someone asked here, would there be another wave of beta invites sent out before launch? And they do mention here there's going to be more invites and, more importantly, a large-scale beta weekend next month. They'll have more information about that soon. When that information does come out, again, I will let you guys know. As I mentioned, and again here, I have been playing the game. I have a ton of content planned for that, so do check out for that in the coming weeks here. Overall, though, it should about cover for today's video. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe, and until the next one, deuce.